Let me begin by acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional country of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plain. We pay respect to elders past and present. We recognise and respect the Kaurna people's cultural heritage, beliefs and relationship with the land, and we acknowledge that these are of continuing importance to the Kaurna people living today. It is with great pleasure that I extend a very warm welcome to our guest of honour, Her Excellency, the Honourable Francis Adamson, Governor of South Australia, and Mr Rod Bunton. We are delighted that you have been able to join us for this significant occasion in the life of the College, the launch of our history in our centenary year. On behalf of the St Mark's community, I thank you. I'd also like to welcome the Chair of the St Mark's Board, Ms Linda Matthews, Board Member Mark Pennament, Acting Head of College, Stuart Meldrum, our previous Head of College, Professor Don Markwell AM, Mrs Angela Bannon, Cameron Akehurst, President of the Old Collegians, Professor John Williams AM and Dr Wendy Reams, and our Honorary Fellows, Dr Pamela Wall, AO, the Honourable Bruce DeBell, AOKC, Associate Professor Angela Evans, AM, the Honourable Rod Matheson, AMKC, and Mrs Lainey Matheson, and Mr Anthony Simpson and Mrs Mary Lou Simpson, OAM. And a special welcome to the authors, who really are the stars of the launch. Dr Carolyn Collins and Associate Professor Paul Sendziuk with Roy Eccleston and Dr Katrina Statz. Apologies have been received from the Honourable Catherine Branson, ACKC Chancellor of the University of Adelaide, and from former Masters, Professor Peter Edwards AM and Mrs Rose Orwin. Rose is represented today by her son, David Abfalter, and we're so pleased that you have been able to join us. But to all guests, we are thrilled that you are here to celebrate the launch of this wonderful history, which has been a focus of our 100th anniversary. Many of you are descendants of founders. Some are relatives of the first master and founder, Sir Archibald Grenfell Price. We have family members of our brilliant old collegians. We have second and third generation relatives of key figures in our history, and others are old collegians. We have current collegians, members of staff, and members of our community who are loyal supporters. Welcome, everyone. The history is of great interest to you all, and I know you're probably dying to get to the point where you can buy your own copy. So I will now hand over to the St Mark's Chair, Ms Linda Matthews. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Karen. It is also my pleasure to welcome you all to St Mark's on this special occasion to launch the history of St Mark's College 1925 to 2025. In commissioning the history, we knew that we had a lot to cover, and we wanted to capture the highs and lows, changes and challenges of what St Mark's has achieved since our founding days. It would have been easier to write a glowing account, since the experience of most students, past and present, is positive. Indeed, life-changing is a common refrain of students relating their experience at St Mark's, one I've heard many times, as many of you have here. But our historians have resisted, and they've included some difficult times. And like all organisations, St Mark's has had to change, evolve, and at times make hard and controversial decisions to deal with events and changing social conditions. In the book, the historians noted when describing events in the 1970s, and for those of you who were there, you will remember those times, they said that society had changed, and as its leadership would realise in coming years, St Mark's would have no choice but to change too. And they quoted a student editor of The Lion who said that St Mark's traditions were ever forming and ever changing, sometimes in step with society and sometimes behind. In 2018, when I became chair, St Mark's was facing unprecedented media scrutiny of a particularly relentless and uncomplimentary kind. The board, the head of college, Professor Don Markwell, and the staff have worked hard to counter the media image of a college in crisis. I believe that our centenary historians, Carolyn Collins and Paul Sendziuk, have produced an impressive account of the journey through many decades where our custodians have sought to reinvent, reform, and stay relevant in these times of massive change. I'm very grateful for their efforts, which I hope you will all agree has done justice to the past 100 years. But I'd also like to thank others who have contributed to the History Project, and in particular our History Book Steering Committee, very ably led by Professor Don Markwell as the chair, who has played a very important role in ensuring that we have a worthy centenary history. I'd also thank Dr. Rachel Buxton, Karen Dunsford, Kathy Radovlevich, and also thanks go to Amanda Ward, our archivist, who was also of great assistance. Really everyone at St Mark's pitched in to help make this such a success, and I thank you all. But now I would like, it's my pleasure to introduce Her Excellency, the Honourable Frances Adamson AC, Governor of South Australia, who will launch our centenary history. Many here tonight will know of the Governor's distinguished career, including becoming Australia's first female ambassador to China in 2011, and in 2016, the first female to become the nation's top diplomat as Secretary of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, DFAT as people call it. We are privileged to have you as our Governor, and we are especially grateful for yours and your husband Rod's support for St Mark's. This has taken many forms, including speaking with our students at formal hall dinner, joining us in March this year to celebrate our centenary at a dinner attended by over 1,000 people at the Convention Centre, and presenting Hawker Scholarships at Government House in June this year. Thank you, Governor, and I invite you to launch our centenary history.
I've got a little bit to say, so I'm going to prepare. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to start in the way I always do on Kaurna country with an acknowledgement in language. Kaurna bogana alia, Kaurna miana alia, yaichi miana alia kumatana yartananku. Nyatuna tampandi, Kaurna miana, yaichi yatamatana, bukininanku, yalaka takareche. I acknowledge and pay my respects to Aboriginal people, whether from Kaurna country or other lands and regions, and I also acknowledge the Kaurna as the traditional owners from the past, today, and into the future. One thing Adelaide does very well is acknowledgements at any major event, and they're normally done in pretty much the same way by everyone who feels that they need to. I'm going to, even though Karen did a very good job, and so did Linda, mine are just slightly different. So if you'll bear with me, I've actually put the authors first. And Linda did say they were the star of the show, but I'm actually going to start with Dr. Carolyn Collins and Associate Professor Paul Sendziuk, co-authors Vision and Hope, A History of St Mark's College. Ms Linda Matthews, Board Chair, St Mark's College. Mr Stuart Meldrum, Acting Head of College. The Honourable Bruce DeBell, Alumnus St Mark's College. The Honourable Rod Matheson, Alumnus and Council Chair from 1982 to 2000. Descendants of Sir Archibald Price, I'm only going to mention one, and that's James, with whom I rowed at the Adelaide University Boat Club, and we gave each other a hug downstairs as if the last 40 years had just sort of melted away. His sense of humour is exactly as it was, and I found myself transported to an earlier time. It wasn't the 70s. It was the late 70s and into the 80s, and things were much better then, actually. I'd also like to acknowledge Professor Jennifer Mackay, Assistant Dean from 1981 to 1983, noting that Professor Mackay was the first woman to hold that role, and I rather suspect that was more difficult than being the first female ambassador to China and the first secretary of DFAT. Of course, she was appointed in preparation for the admission of women. Also like to acknowledge Mrs. Angela Bannon, wife of the late Honourable Dr. John Bannon, alumnus and master of St Mark's College from 2000 to 2007, Professor Don Markwell, Head of College and Chief Executive Officer, King's College, the University of Queensland, and previous Head of St Mark's College. And I should also say Junior Dean, was it not, of Trinity College, Oxford, at a time when my husband Rod was Junior Dean of Balliol College next door. And if any of you should find yourself sitting next to either of them at a dinner and are lost for conversation, just say, please tell me about the green sheep. All right. I'd also like to acknowledge Mr. Anthony Simpson, alumnus, honorary fellow, and a Simpson and Sons Scholarship benefactor to St Mark's College, Dr. Pamela Wall, benefactor St Mark's College and governor St Mark's College Foundation. Sering Hannaford, portrait artist of that wonderful portrait of Dr. Ian Wall and Dr. Pamela Wall downstairs. I've also spotted Dr. Baden Teague, former Senator for South Australia and historian, who I know contributed to the historical information about Sir Archibald Price. Friends all, it is a pleasure to join you with Rod to launch Vision and Hope, a history of St Mark's College, 1925 to 2025. Now, as I walked into this room with Linda, I said, this is a beautiful room. It's my first time here. By the time I sat down, I thought to myself, it is actually my first time in this room, but I did launch another book. It's not that I do it all the time, it's very rarely, but I did launch my late stepfather, Stuart Coburn's book, Writing for His Life. It was launched here in May 2022, but I had COVID and I was quarantined in Government House and I was beamed in on that screen. So it's actually really nice to be standing here, as I should, in the room with you, and I'm glad nothing happened to prevent that this time. 2025 has been a year of centenary celebration for St Mark's College, including the gala dinner on March the 15th, which Rod and I were pleased to attend. With guests jetting in from around the world, a number of them actually former DFAT colleagues of mine undiscovered on the night. The dinner was a true show of St Mark's global reach and the deep and enduring ties with and between its alumni. I congratulate St Mark's College and historians Carolyn Collins and Paul Sendziuk on this thoroughly researched and engaging history. Having been one of the subjects of Carolyn and her husband Roy Eccleston's book, Trailblazers, I know firsthand how you combine, through research, attention to detail and articulate writing, beautiful writing in fact. In Vision and Hope, Carolyn and Paul chart St Mark's evolution with clarity and sensitivity, weaving together milestones, daily life and personal stories in a compelling narrative. Of course, history is more than milestones, it's people and how we shape and are shaped by events. Carolyn and Paul have captured the people and events and shown how they fit into a broader, global really, context. I should sound a note of warning though. It is a weighty tome and I would advise best not read in bed. I did attempt that. It really didn't work too well, and apart from anything else, it evoked such amazing memories that I had some dreams of many decades ago. I won't go into those any further. From before its foundation in 1925, St Mark's College has been shaped by the vision of its founders and the generosity of its supporters. One of my predecessors, Governor Sir Tom Bridges, hailed the college's establishment as, quote, an epoch in the cultural life of South Australia, end quote. How true. He declared that, and I quote again, from its portals would go forth men not only of strong intellect, but of broad view and character, end quote. That vision has endured through the leadership of successive leaders of the college, including those with the leadership and vision to ensure that women too went forth from these portals. Each has put their own stamp on the role while maintaining an emphasis on developing student leadership and living the college's values. The college has produced citizens equipped to think deeply, serve respectfully, and lead wisely. Among them, 2 premiers, Supreme Court judges, Rhodes Scholars, politicians, poets, actors, doctors, journalists, leaders who have made their mark locally, nationally, and globally. To quote from one former marksman, the late Dr. Ian Wall, "I enjoyed my time at St Mark's. I had good preparation for the things I needed to do in my adult life." As we know, these things included co-founding the hugely successful electronics company Codan. Ian also met his future wife Pamela while living at St Mark's, and she was nearby in nurses' quarters. And Rod and I had the privilege of having them both to dinner not so long ago really, and hearing about the wonderful way couples who've been together a very long time talk about their beginnings. It was a lovely evening, Pammy, wasn't it? Philanthropy from alumni like the Walls has enabled expansions, new facilities, scholarships and bursaries, which have allowed many more students to share in the St Mark's experience. At the beginning, scholarships were an important way for the college, in the words of founding council member Harold Fisher, to, quote, attract the best brains in South Australia, end quote. I hope that makes you all feel good. I'm sure it does. While that aim remains, scholarships are increasingly about equality of opportunity and diversity and removing barriers to college life, such as finance, geography, gender and culture. To my mind, what Vision and Hope underlines is St Mark's role in supporting students to develop as whole people. The college experience has been an important part of my family's life. Rod began his time at Oxford University living in at Balliol College, and 3 of our 4 children have had college experiences during their university studies in Canberra and Adelaide. As a University of Adelaide student who lived at home, I might add, I had many peers who lived in residential colleges, including St Mark's. I've seen firsthand how residential college life supports students' academic, intellectual, personal and social growth, the deeper understanding nurtured during tutorials, the broadening of career opportunities that comes with the development of lifelong friendships and networks, and the respect and tolerance that comes with living, studying, socialising and interacting with people with different backgrounds, religions and beliefs. To that list of attributes, I would also add a sense of humour. Part and parcel of St Mark's life is the tradition of undergraduate humour and mischief, the pranks, prosh, intercollegiate raids, and the ancient vehicles in which to undertake rural adventures. How wonderful to see old Gassy polished up and front and centre at the gala dinner in March. I've been privy to St Mark's Port and Talk sessions, which blend intellectual discussion with fortified wine and cheese, and which have attracted many political and industry luminaries as guest speakers over the years. Even the odd former Prime Minister, I think, and possibly serving Prime Minister as well? Certainly formers. Ideas have been hotly contested, beliefs interrogated and discussion vigorous, as students have learnt to debate in fearless and adult ways, and that too is a quote. A sense of community and collegiality has flourished through variety evenings, college balls, musicals, the High Table Cup, and as alumnus Bruce DeBell noted, quote, simply by being fellow members of the college, end quote. With Remembrance Day just past, we also reflect on the St Mark's students who served in the Second World War, Korea, Vietnam and other conflicts, some never to return home. From marksmen to servicemen, they exemplified St Mark's values of service, respect and leadership. Friends, what strikes me most powerfully is that vision and hope is unvarnished in its exploration of difficult times in St Mark's history, as Linda said. That is testament to the college's willingness to know and learn from its past. As Governor, I have found a strong correlation between organisations and communities throughout our state which recognise and celebrate their history and the correlation, organisational resilience and well-being. By staying true to the founder's vision, while recognising that change is essential to growth, St Mark's has survived and thrived. That is clearly evident in the decision to admit women, which has allowed the college to flourish. It seems to me that throughout its history, St Mark's has been at its best when it has lived its values of respect, academic excellence and service. I encourage current residents to live those values fully, giving full play to the diversity of the student body, maintaining the fine balance of extracurricular and academic activities, and engaging critically with the college's history while remaining modern, relevant and forward-looking. It is with great pleasure that I announce this excellent record of the history and contribution of St Mark's College officially launched. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for what really has been a most engaging launch. We really enjoyed your comments and observations of our history, and also we thank you for sharing so many personal connections that you have with the college and with our community. Now, on connections, I actually have found another of your connections. It may be of interest to know that the aunt of Your Excellency, the highly regarded historian and author, Dr. Helen Jones, OAM, née Cashmore, also wrote a history of an educational institution in Adelaide. It was the history of Walford School, and she dedicated the book to the memory of the headmistress, Miss Mabel Jewell Baker. Now, the point of this is Miss Mabel Jewell Baker was a great supporter of education and also of setting up a residential college in Adelaide, and she was one of the founders of St Mark's. So we have another connection through your wonderful family. We would be delighted if you would accept a small gift of our appreciation. I'm going to give you Archie the bear, who is the mascot of the centenary. Now, Archie is named in memory of the first master, Sir Archibald Grenfell Price, and may I say so, with the blessing of the Price family. In fact, one member mentioned that perhaps there was even a resemblance to the bear. So thank you again, Your Excellency, for your generosity of time and for honouring the college by conducting the launch of our history. He's just peeking out. Thank you so much. We have heard that the commissioning of the history began in 2022 as an initiative of the head of college, Don Markwell, who then, along with the college board, invited the authors to write a comprehensive history for the centenary. As you heard, a steering committee was formed to provide feedback on the writing process, and we had the privilege of being the first to read the history, chapter by chapter, as they were completed. I must say, from the very first page, I was completely hooked by the story of the founding of St Mark's and eagerly awaited each instalment right through to the final paragraph of page 291, which reads, I think this was yours, Paul. Since its humble origins as a single house, accommodating just 9 students, St Mark's has grown and prospered, and its masters and students have achieved remarkable things. Despite the trials of economic depression and recessions, war, a pandemic and revolutions in higher education, and the challenge of adapting to social, cultural and technological change. It just makes you feel you can't help but be proud to belong to St Mark's. Now, our Acting Head of College, Stuart Meldrum, would like to introduce the authors to you. Thank you, Stuart.
Good evening, everyone. What a pleasure it is to be here with you all. Such a significant milestone in the expanding story of St Mark's College. I am delighted to introduce the co-authors of our centenary history. Dr. Carolyn Collins and Associate Professor Paul Sendziuk have collaborated numerous times, so this was not a new experience for them. They both co-edited foundational fictions in South Australian history and have written scholarly articles together. Dr. Carolyn Collins is a South Australian-based writer, author and historian. After a long career as a newspaper journalist and a stint in public relations, she completed a PhD in what was then the School of History and Politics at the University of Adelaide. Her thesis was awarded the University Doctoral Research Medal and formed the basis of her second book, SOS, Women, Dissent and Conscription During the Vietnam War, which was published by Monash University Press and shortlisted in the 2021 Victorian Community History Awards. In 2019, Carolyn bravely co-authored with her husband, Roy Eccleston, a very weighty publication, 100 Inspiring Trailblazers, Inspiring South Australian Women. I had a look at this book and was excited to see that the first interview was with Frances Adamson, now Her Excellency, Governor of South Australia. Also included is Dr. Helen Mayo, who was one of the active founders of St Mark's College and some 20 years later, St Anne's College. Carolyn is a past editor of the Journal of the Historical Society of South Australia. She also works as an oral historian for the National Library of Australia, which holds more than 70 of her interviews in its oral history and folklore collection. For the past 2 years, she has co-edited Studies in Oral History, the National Journal for the Oral History Association, and serves on the State Committee of Oral History for South Australia and the Northern Territory. Associate Professor Paul Sendziuk is a teacher of Australian history at the University of Adelaide. Although his occupation is teaching, he does understand the life of a student very well. As an undergraduate student, Paul lived at St Thomas More College in Perth and was later a resident tutor at Newman College in Melbourne. So I am sure that Paul has his own stories and student experiences that prepared him well for the writing of the history of St Mark's College. It seemed that wasn't enough for Paul, and to demonstrate his dedication to the assignment, he took up residence at St Mark's College in 2022, Lewis 6 in the Flats to be specific, allowing him to witness firsthand the student life at the college. He also learnt after several months of the generous brunch offering, you can indeed get sick of hash browns and bacon. Paul is a highly regarded author and editor, so far of 6 books. The publication, A History of South Australia, published by Cambridge University Press in 2018, was awarded the Cairn Medal by the Historical Society of South Australia. Paul has also written over 40 scholarly journal articles, book chapters and encyclopedic entries on topics related to Australian history and the teaching of history. We were very pleased that Paul and Carolyn took up the challenge of writing the history of St Mark's College with the brief to be transparent and to tell it warts and all, which requires the skills of talented writers. It is my pleasure to invite the co-authors, Carolyn and Paul, to share with us their writing experience.
Thank you, Stuart, and good evening, everyone. And a sincere thank you, Your Excellency, for launching our book into the world and for your insights and very kind words. Very humbled and grateful. Thank you. It was a great honour to be asked to write the history with Paul, and as I stand here tonight looking at so many familiar faces, I'm reminded that tonight is a celebration not just of a book, but of a remarkable institution and a community it has fostered for 100 years. And we didn't do it alone. There are many people to thank,
But first I've been asked to talk a little bit about the process of researching and writing this history. So I should start by pointing out that while this is a centenary history, and we say it starts in 1925, the foundation story actually started much earlier, in about 1920, when the vision for a university college in Adelaide began to crystallise. And there were a lot of people involved in making that vision a reality. Some, like Kenneth Henderson, who was a chaplain at St Peter's College at that time, were only involved for brief but important moments, while others, like Agnes Good, who led the band of women who helped fundraise and furnish the college, worked tirelessly in the background, and we really didn't know much about them. And a few, like Archibald Grenfell Price, who became its first master, went on to serve the college for decades and became part of its DNA. So as social historians, Paul and I were very keen for our history to be informed by as many voices as possible. The visionary founders who shaped its early days, the leaders who steered it through times of uncertainty, but also the generations of students and staff who called it home. And we also realised that we couldn't gloss over the challenges faced by the college. And like all history, the college's history is a tapestry woven from dreams, ambitions, setbacks and triumphs of vision and hope. Now, some might wonder how two people can write one history, and there are different ways of doing it, but in this case we decided to divide up the work and to tackle it chronologically, with most chapters covering the tenure of a different master. And I took up the first part, which spanned the establishment of the college up until the departure of the third master. So most of my time was spent in various archives, including those here at the college. And as anyone who has done archival work can vouch, this is often a fishing expedition. Okay, you're never quite sure what you will find, if anything, but you know it when you see it. And fortunately, I love this kind of research, so it was never a chore. But there were a couple of eureka moments, and I'd like to share those with you tonight. Now, the first such moment occurred in the State Library, where I was going through some of the papers of the first master. Now, Price, as you probably know, wrote the first official history of St Mark's College, which was published in 1968. And to be honest, when we first started this project, I wondered if we'd be able to, add much to it. So you can imagine my excitement when among his papers I found an alternative version of the history. Marked confidential for the use in a future college history. This was, shall we say, a more colourful and candid account than the one that was published in 1968. So clearly there was plenty more to say about the college's foundings, but for whatever reason, Price felt that he couldn't say it publicly during his own lifetime. And these notes helped me to flesh out other archival material I found and to explain not just some of the challenges that the founders faced, but also to shed some light on the personalities who were involved. And Price clearly wanted this to aid future historians writing about the college. And while it was written some years after the events it described, it proved to be a fantastic resource. The second eureka moment came in the archives of the South Australian Museum, when I discovered the diaries and letters written by St Mark's first student, Bill Walker. Now, in 1925, Walker was a sixth-year medical student and the first student to move into Downer House. He also became the first president of the Common Room Committee, a role, as you'll read, he took very, very seriously. He was also responsible for that great photograph you've seen at various events of students skylarking on the night before the college's official opening. In his diaries and his letters to his girlfriend Molly, Walker describes in vivid detail what it was like to be one of the founding students of St Mark's. Their dreams and hopes, their daily routines, sporting and social life, setting up the common room, maintaining discipline, right down to descriptions of what they ate, and more on that later. And of course he wrote about the mischief that they got up to. And let's just say that there's a reason why the first set of college rules includes a clause about students only being allowed to enter and depart the college via the doors, not the windows. So this was an amazing contemporary source, and it gave me a great insight into the college's early days. And importantly, it was written from a student's point of view. So by drawing on both Price's and Walker's accounts, I was able to put together a detailed narrative of the first year of the college. And I won't spoil the ending of that chapter, but let's just say that while both men started out with lofty visions and hopes for the new college, the year proved very difficult for both of them. I also enjoyed reading the minutes of the various common room committees, even though the handwriting of many of the secretaries was at times very hard to read, not least, I suspect, because these meetings were invariably held very late at night and probably over a few sherries. But from what I could glean, the main purpose of these meetings was to complain about the college food. The quality of it or the lack of it, usually both. Now, as well as making me chuckle, and these minutes served as a reminder that no matter how accomplished or important they became later in life, the majority of those early students were still teenage boys, and many were away from home for the first time. And having been a mother of a teenage boy, I could relate to this food obsession, although I was horrified to learn that on one memorable occasion, their complaints turned out to be justified. And I'll let you find that page reference yourself. I could say much more about writing this book, and I hope it's obvious how much I enjoyed all the research and the interviews we did. But I do want to leave some time to thank some important people before I hand over to my co-author. And I want to start by extending a special thanks to Don Markwell. Don's vision and leadership were instrumental in initiating and guiding this project. He also read, as you heard, multiple drafts of the entire manuscript, so I think he deserves a medal for that alone. Don, I'm very grateful for your encouragement, your kindness and your wisdom throughout this project. Thank you. My sincere thanks also go to the college's editorial committee, whose thoughtful reviews and guidance undoubtedly enhanced the quality and coherence of this book. And I especially want to single out Karen Dunsford, whose resourcefulness and enthusiasm in sourcing many of the photographs, I hope you will agree when you see it, have really enriched this final book. We are also indebted to Amanda Ward, St Mark's librarian and archivist, for all her help, especially in sourcing photographs, checking captions, and dealing so cheerfully with all sorts of random last-minute questions from the publishers. We couldn't have done it without her. I'd also like to thank everyone in St Mark's community who shared their recollections with us in interviews, in surveys and written contributions. I wish there had been room to include all the anecdotes, but I hope we've managed to capture the spirit of them. And on a personal note, I also want to sincerely thank my co-author, Paul. Paul, thank you for inviting me on this journey and for your endless enthusiasm for the telling of the history of the college and for its place in South Australia's history. And I'd also like to thank Paul's family, Katrina, Theo and Jarvis, and my husband Roy, for putting up with the both of us for the last 3 years. I think they also deserve medals. So I'll just finish by acknowledging that history is never just about the past. It's a living conversation between yesterday and tomorrow. And my hope is that this book will not only document what St Mark's has achieved in its first 100 years, but that it will inspire new generations to dream boldly and look forward to a future filled with hope. So thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for supporting this book, and thank you for being part of the extraordinary history of St Mark's College. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn, and thank you, St Mark's. Carolyn's talked about some of the archival research that we conducted for the book, but one of the other great pleasures of researching and writing this book was conducting some interviews with current and former masters of the college, friends of the college, college staff, members of the college board, and really a lot of people who had anything to say about the college. These interviews were sometimes arranged haphazardly. Someone sort of pulled us aside and wanted to talk and share their memories, and some of them were more formally organised. In the case of interviewing Rose Alwyn, who was a master of the college here for some times, I first travelled over to Brisbane and interviewed her over 2 days, and then she flew back here to Adelaide and I interviewed her again for another couple of sessions, an interview which in the end spanned about 9 hours. So an extraordinarily generous time that she gave us that was so crucial in shaping what we would say in the book and what we'd write in the book. There's some people who I interviewed are in the audience today. Bruce DeBell, I can see you there. Pammy Wall, spent some time with as well. It was one of the great pleasures for me in doing the book was actually getting to see the people who were behind the paper archives. One of the main challenges that Carolyn and I discussed was trying to think about how people would read the book. Have a look at the book. It's a big book. How many people were going to read it cover to cover? How many people were just going to look at the pictures? How many people were going to go just to the chapter that covered their period in college? If they weren't going to read it cover to cover, what did we need to make sure that we put in each one of those chapters? We didn't want to keep repeating ourselves, but people would expect to see a bit of the high table cup. They would expect to see complaints about the food. They would expect to see the pranks. They would expect to hear about the ponding. They would expect to hear about the academic achievements and things like that. So over 15 chapters, one of the real difficulties we had was to make sure that we weren't repeating ourselves, but to try to make sure that each chapter was fresh and to make sure that everyone would still be able to see themselves in the book. As you're reading it, that's what I want you to try to think of and really make the judgment whether we succeeded in doing that. I think certainly that was one of the greatest challenges for us. One of the other pleasures, but also challenges, were trying to serve the different, I suppose, the different masters that we had. The College Book Steering Committee read the various manuscripts that we presented them meticulously. We've heard that they were very complimentary about the chapters that we produced, but this is not true. This is not always the case. To quote one person on the steering committee, after reading a chapter which covered a difficult period in the college's life, this person said, "I hated it. It's ugly." And it was. We were writing about a really difficult part of the college experience, and I wasn't depressed by that feedback at all. I think it meant that we were probably trying to do what the college asked us to do, which was to tell the history, warts and all. This isn't a standard institutional history which is insular, which is celebratory, and which is only interested about the people inside. It's about St Mark's connection with the world, with South Australia, and it's about telling the story, warts and all. One of the other pleasures of doing the book was actually working with our publisher, University of New South Wales Press, who we should mention. They normally put on the launch for the books, by the way. I don't know where they are. We should have got them to stump up some money for this. But they were fantastic, absolutely fantastic to work with. Because the college didn't publish the history themselves, we needed to satisfy a reputable academic publisher that this was going to stand up as a proper scholarly history. And again, not just a celebratory history of a singular institution, which other people outside here wouldn't necessarily be interested in. So we had to write them a proposal. They had to accept that proposal. We had to send them the manuscript, just as we sent the steering book committee the manuscript, and they had to accept it. They had to see this as a rigorous academic, scholarly book, which was going to make a contribution to the history of higher education and the history of South Australia, not just the people who would be, interested because they went to St Mark's. They also then, once given the final manuscript, went about some extensive copy editing, and I've never worked with a publisher that's worked so hard in making sure that our prose and our pictures were as beautiful as possible. It was very thoroughly reviewed, and as you can see, they produced a very handsome, I think, volume. One of the little interesting quarrels we did have with the copy editor, though, regarded the use of college vernacular and phrasing. That is, the words that acquire new meanings at the college and forms of speech which are not perhaps grammatically correct, but nevertheless are perfectly understandable to collegians. The copy editor preferred the use of proper English, but we insisted that our audience would be mainly collegians and this book should reflect the language that they used. And I'll give you an example of this, and I think it's a telling example. When we wrote something like, "The Dean left college," or "the students returned to college," the copy editor kept changing the syntax to read, "The Dean left the college. The students returned to the college after the summer break." And I said, no. You're treating the college as if it's just a place or a location. To collegians, it's more than that. It's a home. It's It's an idea. It's a feeling. It's an identity. One would not say the students left the home, you'd say students left home. Just as collegians would say, and we wanted to write, students left college or students came to college. It's a small difference that meant everything. And I recall feeling quite chuffed when I realised that I understood this as the distinction and that I was adopting the manner of speaking and thinking as collegians did. I really enjoyed working on the book. I was very grateful for the college providing us with the opportunity to do it. Carolyn is an absolute dream to work with. She's meticulous as a researcher. She writes beautifully. She was so far ahead of me in turning out chapters and getting everything done that I was always confident that the book would be delivered on time, and it has been. So I really enjoyed and I thank you, Carolyn, for the work that you did. Carolyn's already given thanks to the other people that contributed to the book, so I just want to end by giving particular thanks to my family as well, my partner Katrina, my two boys Jarvis and Theo, who had to endure living with this book on the kitchen table for much longer than what they thought. Thanks very much.
Oh, thank you, Carolyn and Paul. You really do have our admiration for what you have achieved. And we thank you for writing the story that captures the drive and ambition of the founders, the dedication of the masters to realising their vision, and to the brilliant students who have gone on to achieve distinction. The authors did provide some insight into the joys and the pleasure of writing, and also to the blood, sweat and tears of writing. And I noticed in the acknowledgements, I don't know how many of you read the acknowledgements, but the final paragraph of the acknowledgement I'd like to read to you. When writing a book that takes several years to complete, one's family inevitably has a hand in its composition. They make room for it on the kitchen table and in conversation, cheerfully bearing and sharing the anecdotes and insights, and pick up the slack during the times when the authors are engaged in busy periods of research, writing and editing. We are truly grateful for the members of our families for their love and support. I know you mentioned that, Paul, but I found that in your acknowledgements, just to be a reminder to us all of the monumental task of being a writer and the dedication it takes to create a written history. So, Carolyn and Paul, I'd like to present you with a small gift of appreciation for your brilliant work, and thank you from all of us. Second to enjoy the celebration and well, shortly you'll be able to purchase your own copy of Vision and Hope. Now, as you have been warned by Her Excellency, the book weighs 1.8 kilograms. And I know this because I've been lifting boxes of books today, and there's over 15 kilograms in each carton. The cost of the history is only $49.95. And after you've purchased your book tonight from the table here, the authors will be available for signing at this table. If you have pre-ordered your copy, it may already be signed for you if you'd like to collect it. We also have some centenary items available for you today at Black Friday prices. And you all get a steak knife too. Now, just a reminder that the banner narration will commence in this room at 7:30 p.m, presented by Paul. Paul has a lot of talking to do tonight on the topic of law and politics and St Mark's College. But in the meantime, drinks and canapes will be served until the oration starts. The traditional glass of port that precedes the oration will still be provided. As I mentioned, the history really has been a major project of the centenary, and our centenary finale will be held next Tuesday on the front lawns from 5:30 to 8 p.m. Please do advise us if you're able to join us then. So for now, Happy reading and thank you.